You know, some treaties are just historical footnotes. They're interesting, but they don't really change the game. And then there are others, the ones that are like earthquakes, totally reshaping the world. Well, the Convention of Peking, signed way back in 1860, is one of those earthquakes. So today, we're going to dive into how this one document, signed in the literal ashes of a palace, sent shockwaves that we can still feel today.
But to really get a grip on this treaty, you first have to understand what was lost. Picture this, the Yunmin, the old summer palace of China's Qing emperors. Now, this wasn't just a building. It was a massive, sprawling wonderland of palaces, gardens, and art, covering almost 900 acres. It was a treasure chest, filled to the brim with priceless antiques, art, and books that had been collected for centuries, a true masterpiece.
And then, in October of 1860, it was just gone, turned into this. A pile of rubble. One British observer at the time called it a dreary waste of ruined nothings. This absolute wonder of the world was systematically looted, stripped bare, and then burned to the ground for 3 straight days. I mean, how could something like this possibly happen?
Yeah, the great French novelist Victor Hugo, he did not hold back. He saw the destruction for what it was, a shocking act of vandalism by 2 of the world's most civilized nations. He flipped the script and asked, who are the real barbarians here? It just goes to show you the moral outrage that this act caused, even at the time.
So this wasn't some random act of violence. Not at all. The burning of the palace was the brutal, calculated grand finale of a conflict we now call the Second Opium War. This was specifically ordered as a punishment. It was called a solemn act of retribution, and it was designed to personally humiliate the Chinese emperor and just completely break the will of the Qing Dynasty.
So how did things get so bad? Well, it all kicked off in 1856 with something called the Arrow Incident. Chinese officials boarded a ship they said was a pirate ship, but it was flying a British flag, and that was the spark. By 1858, China was forced to sign a treaty, but when the emperor refused to approve it, the fighting just kept going. Fast forward to October 1860, Anglo-French forces are marching into Beijing, and they start looting the summer palace. And then came the final, devastating blow. On October 18th, the British commander, Lord Elgin, gave the order, burn the whole thing down.
With foreign troops literally in the capital and the emperor on the run, the Qing government was in total collapse. The Chinese military was shattered. Prince Gong, the emperor's brother, was left behind to pick up the pieces, and he had absolutely no leverage, none. He was forced to the negotiating table with the smoke from the burning palace basically hanging over his head. And this, right here, is where the Convention of Peking comes into play. It wasn't actually one single treaty, but a series of 3 separate agreements signed with Britain, France, and, this is the surprising one, Russia. Each one was signed under incredible pressure, with the Qing Dynasty at its absolute lowest, weakest moment.
Now, it is absolutely crucial to understand this term, unequal treaties, because this wasn't a negotiation between equals, not even close. This was a powerful nation dictating terms to a defeated one. The demands were harsh, totally one-sided, and designed from the ground up to benefit the foreign powers at China's expense. The Convention of Peking is basically the textbook example.
So let's break down what was in these deals. You can see how each power just carved out what they wanted. Britain forced China to accept that earlier harsh treaty, pay a huge amount of money for the war, and, this is a big one, give up the Kowloon Peninsula forever. France also got a huge payout and had all Christian property returned, which opened the door for even more missionaries. And then you have Russia. Get this, they didn't even fight in the war. They just acted as mediators and walked away with a mind-boggling prize, all of Outer Manchuria.
You see, the Convention of Peking wasn't just the end of a war. For the Qing Dynasty, it was really the beginning of the end. The terms of this treaty set off a domino effect that rippled through Chinese society, its economy, its politics. It put the dynasty's decline into overdrive. Let's just pause on that Russian land grab for a second. 400,000. That's the number of square kilometers China just handed over to Russia. To put that in perspective for you, that's an area bigger than Germany. A vast territory full of resources just given away by a dynasty on its knees to a country that wasn't even officially an enemy.
And this wasn't just any old land. This move permanently redrew the map of Northeast Asia. By taking this territory, Russia completely, and I mean completely, sealed off China's access to the Sea of Japan. It was a massive strategic win for Russia and an absolutely devastating loss for China, creating geopolitical facts on the ground that are still a big deal today.
So here's how that international humiliation turned into a total internal collapse. It's a pretty direct line.
First, those massive payments, the indemnities, demanded by Britain and France had to be paid. The struggling Qing government had no choice but to pass that cost down to its people with crushing new taxes. This, of course, led to widespread suffering, economic hardship, and famine. And what happens when a government looks weak and its people are starving? Rebellion. The financial fallout from this treaty was a direct cause of massive uprisings like the Taiping Rebellion, a conflict that would kill millions and nearly topple the dynasty.
Now, besides the land and the money, one of the treaty's most famous parts was the legalization of the opium trade, the very thing that kicked off these wars in the first place. Now, the common assumption is that this legalization just caused the opium crisis to explode. But what if the real story is a little more complicated?
This is absolutely fascinating. Some economic research looked at the actual numbers. British opium exports from India to China. And check this out. The data shows that the growth in opium exports was actually way faster before it was legalized. After 1858, that trend line flattens out in a big way. What this suggests is that the Qing government's ban on opium, for all its tough talk, wasn't really working anyway, and legalization didn't cause the huge spike in use that so many people assume it did.
Okay, I know this all might feel like ancient history, but it's not. The lines drawn on the map and the wounds opened by the Convention of Peking have cast a very, very long shadow, and we can still see its echoes in the geopolitics of the 21st century.
Let's just run through the concrete legacy. Think about Hong Kong. Giving up Kowloon was a critical step that led directly to the 99-year lease of the new territories, and eventually the famous 1997 handover. That Sino-Russian border we talked about, it's largely the same one that exists today. And maybe most important of all, the burning of the palace and this treaty became cornerstones of what's known in China as the Century of Humiliation, a powerful national story about foreign exploitation that still shapes Chinese identity and foreign policy. There are even weird little legacies, like an island called Noktundo that the king gave to Russia without realizing it was actually Korean, creating a border dispute that's technically still not resolved.
So, it all comes back to this question. The Convention of Peking was a brutal, one-sided deal, an unequal treaty in every sense of the word. But its impact just goes to show you that history is never really in the past. The decisions made in the ruins of a burned-out palace in 1860 are still defining borders, shaping national stories, and influencing the world we all live in today.